Welcome to the Motoring Podcast, your weekly discussion of motoring news. This is episode 576 on Tuesday, the 30th of April, 2024. Hello, I'm Alan, and yes, I'm all on my own this week. Andrew is not able to get near anything like decent internet. He would be quicker signalling to me with semaphore than he would be trying to actually connect. This week, I'll be chatting about how the UK's EV mandate has become a charged topic. In new car news, we ask, is it an SUV? A lot, or do I? A we? Okay. And in points of interest, I'll bring things to a crawl. As you can tell, he even wrote the menu items for me this week. We're going to start off with some Dieselgate follow-up. It's properly old school. This is just quickly to let you know that Continental, as in tyres, as in many other parts of cars, obviously a tier 1 supplier, whether under their own branding or not, has been fined 100 million euros by the German state prosecutor in Hanover, where Continental's headquarters. This fine follows up on an emissions rigging investigation into the group and into other parts of the company. So yes, Dieselgate, it is still puttering along in the background, far less against the actual car manufacturers and much more about some of the suppliers to the manufacturers. So Continental, ZF, Friedrichshafen, and Bosch. As well. So they've all been dragged in. That's all for follow-up this week, but we're into new news. And Carlos Tavares, the CEO of Stellantis, made a visit to some of the UK manufacturing just last week. And he's on a war against the ZEV mandate, so the zero emission vehicle mandate. He's quoted as saying that the current ZEV mandate is a terrible thing for the UK and warned that it would kill, in inverted commas, the domestic automotive industry. Stellantis don't really make cars in the UK so much these days. They make light commercial vehicles. They make quite a lot of electric light commercial vehicles as well. So what Tavares is saying is that, you know, this is zero emission vehicle mandate is terrible and because there's not the right battery electric vehicle sales mix, and what we really should be doing is incorporating small commercial vehicles in with the cars, because people don't care where the pollution is coming from, they just want rid of the pollution, which, to be honest, makes a bit of sense. So yes, he's saying that the light commercials and cars should be grouped together. Makes a lot of sense, given that, makes a lot of sense that he's saying that, given that Stellantis make light commercials in the UK. The other thing he's saying is that obviously you should be credited for building close to the target market. So if something is being built in the UK, then it should get extra credit compared to something that's being built in, I don't know, let's say China, and imported. Environmental cost and emissions are going to be that bit lower. He said he met with the UK Transport Secretary Mark Harper and proposed those two alternatives to the current mandate structure, which theoretically, and I'm quoting quite a lot from Felix Page's Autocar article here, which theoretically do not cost one penny to the UK taxpayer. Let's move on from Stellantis and Ellesmere Port and Luton and move to Norfolk. And Mike Johnson, Lotus's Chief Commercial Officer and the most senior executive in Europe, will be leaving the company. He's not left yet. He is still the firm's commercial boss. He's still responsible for all the products and for reporting directly to the CEO in China, and he's simply on a leave of absence from the business. It's a good time of the year for gardening leave, but his departure will be properly announced later. Supposedly he's made the decision himself. He's jumping, not being pushed. We'll remember that there was a significant loss from Lotus announced the other week. and that it's, only 5% of the way to the sales goal. I mean, it's so there's a few things there. Share prices halving, a number of things like that. It could well be that that Johnson has had a better offer from somewhere else, quite possibly. That wouldn't surprise me very much. But they are making it very clear that it is his choice to leave. It's not Johnson's first ride within the Geely brand. He did come across from Volvo 18 months ago. One thing I learned from this Steve Cropley article, linked in the show notes, is that Lotus Technology will soon open a new headquarters in London, and Hethel-based Lotus Cars has been repositioned as a factory supplying the sports cars into Lotus Technology rather than the base of the brand. I would imagine that in some ways it was kind of tricky to attract talent to Hethel. In fact, if it was in the Highlands, it would possibly be quicker to get to by many different ways. Hethel, maybe it's just the routes I've taken that have taken me past it, but it just seems incredibly remote, despite only being in Norfolk. So I can understand why you do that, but on the other hand, it's a bit of a shame to lose the history. But then when you think back, you look at it, Lotus was founded in London, so you could argue that Hethel is the ridiculous place to have moved to, despite the fact that it's all in our sort of conjoined consciousness. The other thing, of course, being that the Electra and the Emea are going to be built in China. So most of the production will take place there rather than in Hethel. It's going to be obviously far more specialised stuff and probably some development stuff that takes place out of Hethel. Let's move on. Next story is a little bit tangential to cars themselves. It's about the streetlights in Leicester. Leicester City Council suffered a cyber attack the other week that shut down its IT systems and phone lines. It was ransomware, and one of the things that it did was keep the streetlights on. It's quite an interesting thing, actually. If there's a fault in the street lighting system, the default that they go to is to stay on all of the time, because that's better than them going off. So people were complaining about streetlights being on in Leicester because it was daytime, and understandable, really. City Council says it's not paying a ransom, and it probably has no money to do it anyway, and it's probably cheaper to leave the lights on than it is to actually pay for the ransom, which is kind of crazy. But that's how it is. So some bright news for Leicester there. Back to fun vehicles that we all know and love, and it's EVs. Time it is bigger EVs than we normally talk about. It is not another electric SUV. We're talking about the Mercedes-Benz EACTROS 600. And there's an announcement, there's an article on Electrive this week saying that developers and engineers at Mercedes-Benz Trucks have charged a prototype EACTROS 600 with an output of 1 megawatt for the first time. So obviously this is a prototype charger speaking to a prototype vehicle, but it's pushed a megawatt at the Development and Test Center in Wurt am Rhein in Germany. This is all in preparation for something called the megawatt charging system. It's a standard that's not going to be finalized until 2025. So this is really sort of showing off that it can be done. The thing is that megawatt charging system doesn't necessarily always mean the full megawatt. It can be anything above 700 kilowatts. So that's an interesting one to follow. What's kind of cool about this is that the article, as I say on Electrive, goes through and it explains that even if you bought an EACTROS 600 or any other electric Mercedes truck, because the system's modular, and again, I'm sure Volvo, Scania, etc. aren't very different in this. The system is modular, so if you want to upgrade the charging speed later, you can. You can swap out that module and swap in a newer fancy one. Worth mentioning, EACTROS 600 can already be charged up to 400 kilowatts. So that's based on the CCS charging standard for trucks. So this is still a significant step above it. So interesting things. I really like this kind of stuff. Staying with electric vehicles as a theme, Samsung SDI, the Korean company's battery business, has promised EV batteries that can charge to 80% in a mere 9 minutes, plus models that can continue to charge at that level for 20 years. They plan on starting to produce this ultra-fast charging battery in 2026, and the long life product will start from 2029. Again, you'll never guess, this is talking about solid-state batteries. So obviously that next step on from the lithium-ion that we're all familiar with in our power banks and our laptops and all these kind of things. One of the things that Samsung is being very big at and is really focusing on is trying to reduce the likelihood that things catch fire. That is a bit of a problem with lithium-ion batteries, because as soon as one gets damaged, or even just through age, they can get punctured, increase in size and damage stuff, all these kind of things. They're trying to get rid of that. They're planning to use vents that exhaust heat and gas away, obviously draw in fresher air. The idea is that by keeping them cool, obviously, then it reduces the chance of thermal runaway if something goes wrong in the first place. We'll see what happens. I mean, we're talking solid-state batteries and stuff. They're still not there. They're still not in production. Everybody's been promising them a couple of years out and a couple of years out and a couple of years out. It'll be great when we see them, but up until then, I just nobody's producing them at scale yet. Toyota, as we've noticed before, as we've commented before, have really been trying to introduce them and are talking about them quite a lot. Let's see what happens. Obviously, production dates are a couple of years out, as it is. So either we will be covering this in a lot more detail in 2 years, or it will have died a death and we will never speak of it again. Something that I do speak of every single week is Guilt Minute. Oh, that was smooth. The quick break in the show where we ask for a tad of financial support to keep the lights on and the hosting running. If you feel that Motoring Podcasts are worth a small consideration every month, then you can become a patron. Different levels of patron include different levels of commitment from us to you, including being able to watch the show recorded live. We also have a small range of merchandise in our spring store, from stickers to mugs and t-shirts. If you don't have any spare cash, and we completely understand, you can help us by following for free from our podcast player to receive every show as they're released, and by liking and rating the show in whatever way your podcast supplier lets you. If you've done all that, and some of you do, so thank you very much, then the last thing you can do is to recommend us to your friends or colleagues. As always, new car news is up next, and we start off with, yes, one of the worst named vehicles out there, the Vauxhall Grandland. We mentioned this last week when we talked about the Crossland. You'll notice that the X's have disappeared from the ends of all these names. That's a blessing, because it might have looked cool, but it was always a pain to say. And why on earth, by the way, Crossland was a decent name for stuff. It gets you across land. Grandland is a rubbish name. It should have been the one that was replaced with Frontera. It is, however, probably a pretty decent car if you can get past the Vauxhall badge. It's based essentially on the Peugeot 5008, so on the STLA medium architecture. That means it's just over 15 centimeters. It's actually just over 17 centimeters longer, a little bit higher, a little bit wider. So it looks good. It's got the sort of Vauxhall front on it. It's got a nice looking interior in the renders here. all the stuff that's actually really great about that platform, and that's really great about some of the Stellantis work at the minute. I don't know how much of the outside is shared with the 5008. I can't remember straight off. But yeah, it's also the final model in all of the Vauxhall range to actually come along with an EV model. So the top range, the top rung model at the top of the range uses a 98 kilowatt hour battery to get an official range of 435 miles. Obviously, your mileage will vary. It can charge it up to 160 kilowatts, and that'll get you from 0 to 80% capacity in around 26 minutes. I mean, that's barely enough time to plug in, have a wee, get a coffee, and get back to the car at most motorway services these days. There will be a shorter range 73 kilowatt hour battery model as well, and that will come with a 316 horsepower dual motor drivetrain. These are crazy numbers. There are other versions too. There's a plug-in hybrid that uses a 1.2 3-cylinder petrol engine and a battery big enough for 53 miles of electric-only range, which is still pretty darned useful. And of course, the most popular ones are going to be the hybrids, mild hybrids, which use that same 136 horsepower engine with a 28 horsepower 48 volt motor through a 6-speed dual clutch auto. It is much bigger. I mean, Autocar here points out it's going to be the same kind of size as a RAV4 or a Nissan X-Trail. So that's a decent size in the UK. It's kind of about as big as you can go, really, without becoming too awkward in car parks, too awkward to get around small streets and things. It should be priced between 30,000 and 35,000 for the petrol. Add 5,000 for plug-in hybrid, and you're going to be in the mid 40,000s for the EVs, which is yeah. I mean, it's how much stuff costs these days. It is a little bit sucky through the teeth, but nobody's ever going to go out and buy a Grandland with all the money all at once. They're always going to be on the tick at some level. I noticed on the rear they've even spelt out the word Vauxhall in the way that so many manufacturers do now, rather than putting a logo which can be all asymmetric and nasty. You have to spell it out in words because everything looks all the same, he says, speaking in inverted commas. I quite like that, by the way. I don't know. Hopefully I haven't sounded too negative, because I do quite like it, apart from its rotten name. Next up, from the sublime to the ridiculous, the electric Mercedes G-Class has been revealed. It is barely rounded off at the corners, so it's a G-Class, but barely rounded off. In fact, some parts, at least one part, has been squared off. So it was known as the EQG, but Mercedes-Benz has decided it's going to change its naming because the EQ bit doesn't seem to be working very well. So it's going to be launched as the G580 with EQ technology, because that's so much better. Not. It is essentially a G-Class with batteries and 4 motors, one at each wheel, and a smoothie grill. I mean, there's some tweaks. So it's got a new aerodynamically sculpted bonnet, something which has never been said of a G-Class ever before, which takes it down to a barely reasonable 0.44 drag coefficient. I hate to think what the CDA is. But that's, much better than the 0.53 for the previous generation. Nobody buys a G-Class caring at all about the drag coefficient. That is possibly the least useful metric in ever talking about a G-Wagon. It has, as I said, it has 4 electric motors, 1 at each wheel. Each puts out 145 horsepower. Because of magic electrical maths, that means a maximum output of a mere 579 horsepower with 859 pound-feet of torque. Each has been developed for the G580. Each is driven by a separate 2-speed gearbox. I can't see anything that could possibly go wrong here. Urs, who is the head of eDrive systems for Mercedes-Benz G, said that the unusual and highly complicated powertrain was developed specifically to meet the exacting specifications of the G division and will not be used elsewhere in the lineup. You get independent front suspension, rigid axle at the rear containing the integrated electric drive unit, and virtual rather than mechanical diff locks. Where is it? 0 to 62, less than 5 seconds, top speed of 112. Mercedes claims the G580 offers up to 100% gradability on certain surfaces, and that means you can go up a 45-degree slope, by the way, one along, one up. And the ability to traverse side slopes of up to 35 degrees. Well, that will be more than slightly terrifying. But I guess with the battery pack at the bottom, the centre of gravity will be nice and low. You'll also be able to afford up to 850 millimeters because, of course, there's no air intake for the engine. It's actually 100 millimeters higher than the regular G-Wagon, and it's the height of the charging port that is the limitation. I imagine at some point the height of the fresh air intake for the cabin will become a limitation. G580 offers, this is the bit I was trying to get to, three bespoke functions to aid off-road driving: a G-turn, which allows it to rotate 720 degrees on the spot. Why you would want to do why they've limited it to 2 complete revolutions, I don't know. Is there some reason? It's in case on the first revolution you pass the point you meant to stop at, so you can just keep going, or I suppose it's probably to protect the tyres. It also has G steering, which reduces the turning circle by enabling it to pivot around an individual wheel, much like tractors do. You know, where you've got the 2 brake pedals in a tractor, one for one wheel, one for the other. You can do it that way. It's just like our 1950s Nuffield we had. Yeah. And an off-road crawler function that runs as low as 1.2 miles an hour. You also have a new transparent bonnet function that uses front-facing cameras to project forward on the infotainment screen to make tackling objects easier. Land Rover showed that off about 10 years ago, by the way. That was almost the and finally for this week, apart from the fact that I remembered, 1, we'd seen it before, and 2, it was 10 years old. One last thing. The G580 will be offered with a special G-Raw function that offers an emotive sound experience in the cabin. There we go, the new G-Wagon, no mention of price. You probably can't afford it. We're probably not target market. I think it's kind of cool that it exists, but in the same breath, I'm not really sure why it exists. It'll look great cruising around city centres. If any of the G-turn and the G whatever will all be used to show off in car parks. 1 or 2 might be used off-road, but that's kind of it really, I think. It's cool. As I say, I like that it exists. And I've always had a really soft spot for the G-Wagon. But unless it takes, 3 years to get to 60 miles an hour, then as far as I'm concerned, it's not a proper G-Wagon. Give me an early petrol 230 or something. All the discomfort. One last piece of ridiculousness in new car news. Lamborghini has unveiled its first plug-in hybrid SUV with the 800 horsepower Urus SE. It will give you a 4-litre twin-turbocharged V8 as familiar to Porsche and Bentley owners. It's been re-engineered to use with the plug-in hybrid system, and it produces 611 horsepower on its own. Combined output will be 800 horsepower, 701 pound-feet of torque, which means it'll get from 0 to 62 in 3.4 seconds at a top speed of 193 miles an hour. So it's going to rip the G-Wagon on the drag strip, unsurprisingly. But it will also be able to cover up to 37 miles on battery power alone with a 25.9 kilowatt-hour lithium-ion battery pack. There's different drive modes. That's kind of it, really. Oh, and a new diffuser. No idea on prices, but it is expected to be above the £209,000 asked for the Performante version. But they're expecting the Urus SE to be the company's best-selling model, and that wouldn't surprise me either, to be honest. I was behind an Urus the other day. It's very wide, but I think that it's one of those cars that always looks really good from the front and the back. It's the side and the rear door handles that always let it down. It just looks a bit distended, and then the door handles are sort of stuck on like weird warts on the side. You can just tell that nobody really wanted them to be there, but they have to share all the same architecture, so there was no choice. It's one of those compromises. It would be so much cooler if it had no door handles. Don't say that about cars very often. That's the end of new car news. There's a very quick designer's mood board here. Josef Kaban, formerly of the Volkswagen Group, where he was in charge of the design department. He is going to join SAIC. That's the parent company of MG, if I remember rightly. With a new gig in China. Yes, it is a parent company of MG. I knew that. Why did I even say I think? Points of interest this week, and we start off with as usual with the lunchtime read. This week's lunchtime read comes from Keith Adams at thejoyofspecs.co.uk, and it is about estate car euphemisms. No, mostly not that kind of euphemism, but yeah, different names that people have called what we traditionally call a state car. Great article though. Go have a read. Take 10 minutes of your lunchtime looking at that. This week's list of the week, and I don't know why listicles seem to be out of fashion at the moment. I wish they'd come back into fashion. I guess all the easy ones have been used up over the years. So this week's is from Autocar. It's the Forgotten Cars of the 1980s. I chose a Chevrolet Beretta because everybody seems to have forgotten the Chevrolet Beretta ever existed. This one here is the Beretta GTU. I always liked the fact they had the full heck blend thing at the back and slim lights at the front, and it was quite an attractive, it's quite a handsome looking thing in a sort of, oh, it's a bit bland, isn't it, kind of way, but you know, with hidden door handles and stuff. It was still kind of cool, the Beretta. So it's in there. Loads of stuff that most of us will have not forgotten. Autocar, by the way, tell me they have updated their slideshow software. That should mean less mashing of words. Last but not least, this week is the and finally. Some of you may have seen on my social medias that I shared some clips of my little Tamiya Toyota Land Cruiser that I've been building over the last couple of months. I think it's taken me on and off as a wet weather project. And goodness me, we've had enough wet weather. In fact, one of the reasons it took so long was because I couldn't use my my paint booth or Amazon box on the balcony for painting the shell and painting some of the parts because it was too wet outside. But I've spent a couple of months building that just as a sanity project. I can't work on cars in an apartment garage, stuff like that, you know. So I need something to make and do because that's the way my little brain works and has to work. And so I built that from a kit. And I thought, oh, well, and so I shared some video of it, pottering about outside and doing a little sort of very minor off-roading with some pine cones as obstacles and things like that, because I don't have a proper setup or anything. So I thought I'd share 40 incredible RC crawlers. Now, this is 17 minutes long, so it's a bit of a bonus lunchtime watch, just to show some of them. It lists a whole bunch of models as well and where you can buy them. And it's quite cool. It's really good. 17 minutes. It's the one I could find that didn't have adenoidal people like myself talking over the top of it and things. So I'll just let that one be and rest there and have a look through and see if it inspires you at all. That, I think, finishes it up for this week. No particular parish notes. Mr. Clues will be back next week. The week after that, I'm not sure what the plan's going to be because I'm probably travelling and I don't know how it'll be going time-wise. But don't forget, in the meantime, that between now and next week, you can give us any feedback, share your thoughts of the show at Motoring Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, on Facebook, and on the contact page of motoringpodcast.com, the hub of all our activities. Remember, you can support us financially via Patreon, and please leave a review and rating on Apple Podcasts or however your podcast app lets you do such a thing. If Andrew were here, he would be suggesting that you could get in touch with him, either by searching for Cracked Windscreen on Twitter or on LinkedIn, of all places, under his own proper name. Meanwhile, best ways to get in touch with me are via Twitter or even Blue Sky, or somebody pointed out that I was using Threads wrong at the weekend. I believe I was called a boomer by someone older than me. Thanks, Jim. And so I have been poking at Threads because people said, oh, of course you're not getting any interaction if you don't ever use it. So, suitably chastised, I found yet another platform to play with. But yeah, we'll see how long that lasts. In the meantime, Andrew and I will be back soon. But until then, I've been Alan Bradley, and safe motoring.